Minnie glanced at Terry. The way Terry was staring at the women on the floor was enough of an answer for her. With her pregnancy facing her, the last thing she could afford to do was antagonize Terry. She realized that the bigger her stomach became, the more she would be forced to depend on Terry's goodwill. With the car that she owned, Terry would be indispensable. Give her a couple of more months of steady using, and a sight like this would be the last thing in the world to shock her. More than likely, Terry would be participating in the shows herself. "No, honey," she replied to the woman on the floor. "I think we'll just watch." Terry fumbled in her purse and brought out $10. "Here, Porky," she said, holding the money toward him nervously. Smokey got up from the couch and came over and removed the money from her outstretched hand. Porky grinned at her. "You know you ain't got to spend no money, Terry. All you got to do is join the other ladies on the floor." She stared at him, astonished. "You hold your goddamn breath, nigga, until you see me laying on the floor making a spectacle of myself for one of you freaks." Her small bosom swelled with anger, while her eyes glinted with unconcealed fury. Her violent reaction worked as a stimulant on Porky. He could feel himself beginning to have an erection. His hand slid down to his penis, and he unconsciously began to stroke himself. His breathing became heavy, while his reptilian eyes closed and unclosed in ecstasy. Terry was overwhelmed with repugnance as she watched him. The fleeting thought that such a man held power over her filled her with dread. She made a silent promise that this would be her last fix. After today, she would find some way of getting help. Somehow, she would find the strength. Minnie spoke up. Her voice was harsh and sarcastic. "Whenever you finish jacking off, Porky, we would appreciate it if you would take care of your business." She held out a $10 bill towards him. Porky stared at her coldly. His small eyes glittered with open scorn. Minnie brought to his mind all the rejections he had received from girls while going to school. They had all talked to him as if he should be thankful they allowed him to breathe the free air. In truth, he had a deep hatred for humanity. He could never forget the horror of his school days. He had been very sensitive about his abnormal size, yet time and time again, he tried to reach out across the span that separated him from the other children, desperately wanting to be accepted. The only time the other kids would allow him to play was when they felt like ridiculing him. Pig had been his nickname then, but when he got older and began to realize the power a dope bag brought to the pusher, he quickly put an end to being called Pig. He had always been grotesquely fat, no matter how much he tried to lose weight. The family doctor had told his mother it was a gland problem, so not to worry about it. Some people were just meant to be large. As he grew older, he realized that many people feared him just because of his features. He even admitted to himself that he resembled a gorilla. What he really enjoyed, though, was the fear that he inspired in women. When he saw that, it aroused him the way nothing else could. There was nothing he enjoyed more than sleeping with a woman who was petrified by fear. Many of them became paralyzed, practically statues of stone, when he started making love to them. Smokey took the money out of Minnie's hand as Porky lumbered over to his overstuffed chair and sat down. "Don't get beside yourself, bitch," she warned Minnie as she gave them each a pack of dope.
"You bitches ain't getting paid just to lay on the floor,"
Porky yelled loudly at the two women on the floor. Minnie rolled her eyes at Smokey, but didn't reply. Smokey resembled a robot, a walking zombie. Porky kept her so high that, most of the time, it seemed she wasn't aware of where she was. Whenever the addicts discussed her abnormal habit, they spoke in voices full of awe. She was completely at the mercy of Porky's whims. If he were to put her out, her chances of staying alive would be small. Her daily use of heroin would cost an addict on the street over $500 a day. In the run of a week, she used the retail value of over $3,000 worth of dope. Smokey headed back towards the bedroom, stepping over the two women on the floor. She stared past them, her dilated eyes not even seeing them. She lacked the slightest interest in what they were about to do. As Minnie and Terry took their dope and sat down beside each other, the two women on the floor began to perform. More for their own benefit, really, than for anyone watching. Each woman stretched out with her head pointed towards the other's feet, while their legs interwove intimately. They were using the scissors position, a favorite of professional lesbians, and as they rubbed cunt to cunt, it became apparent that there was nothing faked about this. Both women were thoroughly enjoying themselves to such a degree that no other person seemed to exist in the apartment for them. Terry found herself blushing as she watched the women. My God, she thought, this can't really be happening. Not in a room full of people and most of them men. She cautiously glanced out of the corner of her eye to see how the men were reacting to this grotesque display. To her astonishment, very few of the male addicts were really watching. Most of them were too involved in trying to find a vein to shoot their dope in, while those who had already shot up were nodding as though nothing at all strange were going on. Here and there, Terry could see a person looking on curiously, but on the whole, only the women addicts were interested. Many of them moved their legs unconsciously as they watched the act build up to its climax. Porky stared at the women hungrily, saliva running out of the corner of his mouth and dripping down on his huge chest. After watching a little longer, Terry began to find the show repetitious, so she opened her small pack of dope and began to snort it up. When the women finished, they sat up on the floor and began to snort some dope off an album cover Smokey had set out beside them. Porky got up and waddled over to the bedroom door. He came back, leading one of his huge German police dogs. He held the dog between his legs as he spoke to the women. "I'll tell you what I'll do," he began, his voice thick with desire. "I'll give either one of you half a fourth of dope if you'll freak off with Butch in front of everybody." He patted the dog on its back. Both of the women stared up at him angrily. Tess, the larger of the two, replied viciously, "I'll tell you what I'll do, you fat black son of a bitch, you. I'll give you a fourth of dope if you let us watch your dog fuck you in your fat black ass. What about that, you freaking motherfucker, you?" She spat out at him. For a brief moment, Porky felt a jolt of fear. He knew Tess was one of the most dangerous lesbians around. He searched the faces around the apartment until he saw one of his doormen watching them closely. He relaxed slightly. "Just because you done time for cutting up a nigger girl, that ain't shit," he said with renewed courage. "If that nigger had been a man, he'd have kicked you in your ass and took that little funky whore you cut him up over." Tess jumped up and began to put on the men's clothes she wore. Porky bit his lip nervously. He didn't want to lose her business. Between her and the prostitute she kept, they spent quite a bit of money in the run of a week. Ever since she was released from prison, she had been using. He was sure that she was strung out now. If she kept using drugs, the day would come when she wouldn't find the thought of having one of her girls copulate with a dog repugnant. Porky's common sense cautioned him to be patient. He grinned suddenly. "God damn, Tess, baby. You know I was just joking with you, girl. I didn't think you'd take me serious and get rocks in your jaws, baby." He removed a $10 pack of dope from his pocket and tossed it to her. Tess caught the pack and bit back the acid remark she had been about to make. "Yeah, Porky, just so long as we understand each other," she said, and smiled a knowing smile. Porky glanced across the room at Terry, who was nodding off her dope. Her neat little dress was pushed up around her thighs, revealing golden tan skin just above her stockings. As her head dropped down on her chest, her legs parted slightly, causing Porky to catch his breath. He stared in fascination. Sliding down in his seat, he tried to peep up higher under her dress. His feverish mind began to undress her, until he could visualize her completely naked. He pictured his dog's large head stuck up between her beautiful thighs. As the dog became excited, he imagined Butch biting and growling, his shaggy head shaking from side to side as blood from his bites came running down her legs. Her screams of pain then turned to moans of pleasure as he snatched the dog away and stuck his huge head in its place. Tess punched her woman in the side. As the prostitute turned to see what she wanted, she pointed over at Porky, who was deep into his vivid fantasy. Suddenly becoming aware of his obscene stare, Terry closed her legs and blushed. "Damn," she said to herself. "You're beginning to sit just like some common whore. Legs gaped all open for any man to look under your dress." Perversely, she thought, Well, the bastard sure couldn't see nothing, no matter how hard he was trying. I should open them real wide. Maybe then the son of a bitch will see enough to get his kicks off.